is director of the Migration Policy Institute for Europe. She joins us now live for more on this story. Camille, thank you very much for being with us. It's very clear to say that this isn't the same EU that opened its doors to millions of Syrian migrants back in 2015, is it? Complete change.
Yes, indeed. Things have not changed, especially in the past 10 years after the crisis and the attempts from the European Commission, from member states to change legislation. They adopted, as you know, almost 2 years ago now, this new pact on migration and asylum. And since then, there's been, on the one hand, all this effort to implement the pact, but also efforts to add these pieces of legislation. And this return regulation was really presented as one of the key missing pieces of this architecture. And what is really striking for us who follow EU politics on migration for many years is how quickly this agreement have come. Because while there's been an attempt to reform these common EU rules on return since 2008, still the proposal from the Commission for this new regulation came a bit more than a year ago, and already Member State Parliament came to an agreement on it.
And in terms of comparing it to Donald Trump's hard line on immigration, is that fair? The EU is saying that it's not fair. However, there are certain things that when you read them, such as home raids and, of course, deporting people to detention centres in a different country, it does sound very almost dystopian.
Yeah, I would say here there are, of course, many differences. The main one is rule of law continues to prevail in Europe. And in that regard, return hubs, while they follow, I would argue, the same kind of objective, which is to increase the number of return, to deter people from coming, and also to incentivize people to return on their own, what the Trump administration has called to self-deport. The way it's been framed in the EU law is to make it, compatible with international law. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, High Commission for Refugees, has also issued a number of guidelines on how this would be implemented. So in that regard, if this return hub were to happen, if they were to be effectively established, they would look very different, I would argue, from what the Trump administration has been doing while sending people to countries with which there were only very informal agreements. Here we know this agreement need to be formal, and that there will be monitoring of what is happening on the ground.
Which is reassuring in one sense. But if you consider, for instance, how the United Kingdom, how the Brits tried to set up a system under the previous Conservative government where they would expel unsuccessful asylum seekers, undocumented migrants, to Rwanda. And this was a deal that was going ahead. And I think something like 800 million euros, or the equivalent, was spent in the development of something which was then scrapped because it was deemed to be unworkable, unfeasible, something that really should never have been undertaken. Is what the EU proposing now basically the same kind of thing?
So it's the same kind of deal in that this is a deal with a third country to help manage what's happening in EU. While some member states presented as part of a broader package to work together on responsibility sharing, I think what's driving a number of member states at the moment for negotiation on this return hub is really this transactional logic, and this is what we've seen at play also between the UK and Rwanda. The difference here with the return hubs is that he would apply to people who have received a return decision. What we've seen is like an unaccompanied minor would be excluded, but families with children will, presumably still be eligible to be sent to the third country. But really the question is indeed what's going to happen when a deal, your colleague mentioned a number of countries that have been, part of a candidate list for this return hub, Kazakhstan. There's also been talks about Uganda, about Rwanda. What are these countries going to ask in exchange for this cooperation? What are going to be the standards for people when they stand there? And what remain, I think, very much a discussion is whether people will be sent there to stay and receive, legal residence, the right to work, the right to access social protection, or whether this will just be a temporary solution, and that they will then be sent back to their country of origin. There are still so many unknown and questions about how exactly this is going to be negotiated. And we're seeing different member states coming together to kind of negotiate this agreements, and key question also around who is going to fund that, who's going to pay for that, and is that really going to make a change to the return system as we know it? Because at the end of the day, I believe public opinion are going to be asking that question.
Is this, and public opinion's the next question really, is this the EU now reacting to the wave of far-right support going across Europe? I mean, clearly 2015, 1 million Syrians came in. That got a lot of people angry because of a perception, because it wasn't necessarily the case that countries were overwhelmed, but it was a perception which was stoked by right-wing media, which was made to seem worse than it really was. I think there were some crimes that were committed too, but crimes are committed in all aspects of life. So I don't think we should actually major on that. But in terms of how it was reported, in terms of how it was portrayed, and of course the figure, 1 million Syrian migrants, are we now, in a sense, paying for that? Has this led to a change in the EU going more towards the right wing, even the hard right wing, in terms of its migration policy?
Well, definitely has, given that this agreement on the return regulation has been agreed in Parliament with the far right. There was, initially talks about the previous coalition with the centrists, with the centre left, to negotiate with the right. But in the end, the right preferred to find new allies and allow a more, an even further proposal to go forward in Parliament. While traditionally Parliament had been the one institution of this EU architecture that was kind of rebalancing some of the proposal coming from the Council. So this is where we are now. What is also very clear from this proposal is really an emphasis on forced return. Putting more obligation to individuals who have received a return order, putting people in detention for longer period, even though evidence shows that this does not improve, the likelihood of compliance with the return order. And third, more pressure also on countries of origin. And so this is all about, in the discourse, being able to say we're doing more to enforce forced return, while in the past years there were more emphasis on assisted return, finding different tools, finding different mechanisms to incentivize people who have received this return order to comply with it. And I would say this was not because previous government were trying to be nice. It was also because there were evidence showing that this was leading to better results.
Indeed, that better result, of course, for some people isn't enough, and they just don't want people who don't look like them in the country. But that's, again, another discussion that we could have, and I'm afraid we don't have time to have it. But Camille, thank you so much for joining us. Camille Le Coz, Director of the Migration Policy Institute of Europe. Thank you for your analysis of this really important story.